having that mind to be able to pivot, and the success and the resources that you have in your life to allow you to pivot is so important. I think even in people who try to pivot, what happens is that the people around them will try to influence them not to, just because they don't feel that they can pivot. And that can be as detrimental as you just putting a gun in somebody's hand. Your inability to make a positive change should not dictate my life and my journey. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Pretty Suited Podcast, where we discuss real topics through the lens of some of the most iconic figures in our culture. I'm your host, Lauren A. I had so much fun in February talking about some of our favorite couples and movies. I want to do a little bit more than just recapping movies, but really expand the conversation and improve the narrative of some of these topics in these movies. So if you want a channel that's going to talk mostly about just the movie review, like a recap scene by scene of a movie, this is not it. Okay, this is going to be a little bit more in depth as we discuss the elements of these movies and topics, and that we can apply it to our everyday life. So in this particular episode, I want to kick off by saying, as you may have heard the phrase, every generation gets weaker and wiser. If you let my daddy tell it, we are absolute trash and we are unprepared for life, and we just have no idea how life is really going to kick us in the butt when we get to our 60s and 70s. And while he may be absolutely right on that, I will say that previous generations, we are the product of that, right? So we had to deal with all of their traumas, all the things that they've learned, their ups and their downs, and even, their desire to create a better life for us than what they had. And so in my generation, we're kind of doing the same thing, right? We're saying that Generation Z and Alpha are also weaker in that they have no idea how to be resilient, or they're not even equipped for the actual real world. But I would say this, I would challenge that by saying this, they are the product of us. So who do we blame for these mishaps? When I think about the situation, I can't help but think about the classic story of Boyz N the Hood. Boyz N the Hood is definitely a classic, we would say, hood story, but I say it goes far beyond that because it has so many different elements that we're going to attempt to break down today. I feel like Boyz N the Hood was a kickstart of some legendary classic Black films that came out in the 90s and 2000s, also directed by the legendary John Singleton, that showcase so many different layers of economic disparities, health disparities, illogical thinking, systematic oppression. It showcased such fantastic storytelling. So it debuted in 1991, like I said, directed by John Singleton and starring the young but very, very talented Cuba Gooding Jr., as well as Ice Cube, Angela Bassett, and the legendary Lawrence Fishburne. And of course, it showcased some of our favorites on this podcast, Morris Chestnut, as well as Nia Long. So in this particular story, we see Trey, who is a young gentleman who was being raised by a single parent at the time of Angela Bassett. He was, of course, going through the woes and ups and downs of a teenage boy, of course, figuring himself out, following the wrong crowd, maybe not doing so well in school.
As I was saying, he's highly intelligent. He has enormous vocabulary. It's just that...
Yes, go on.
It's just that he has a very bad temper.
As you know, 1991, the year is coming off the precipice of the crack epidemic, where in 1980s we saw many families and neighborhoods just devastated by crack cocaine and how it tore apart not only the nuclear family, but also just the thinking and systematic growth and economic growth of the Black family. Of course, fathers went to prison. Many fathers went to prison. Many fathers were killed. Many fathers and mothers suffered from addiction. And so, unfortunately, that just precipitated into the home and affected the children that were being raised in those environments. And then this story, it was no different. I will say that thankfully, Trey was coming from a home of two parents who not only loved him, but you can tell wanted what's best for him. So, of course, as this young man is trying to find his way, his mother felt that he needed to be raised by his father at a certain point in his life, which I felt that was very, very appropriate.
Well, here he is.
What's up, dog boy?
Well, there goes your son. I can't teach him how to be a man. That's your job.
I know a lot of times when you do have parents who decide to co-parent, they feel that the younger years can be spent with the mom because you feel like the mother is the nurturer where they're young and impressionable and they need that mother's love. And then, of course, in the later years, once the person is starting to develop and go through puberty and kind of try to figure out their ways of the world, then the father will be a better suited parent at that time. And so for me personally, I just think they could be either way. I think that children instinctively need both parents in order to kind of be the most well-rounded. I'm not saying that single parents of either gender can't do it alone. Of course, we know that they can. But, you know, in a situation like this where you were already in a time that was so devastatingly impacted by drugs, that you needed both parents to kind of like overcome those obstacles. So Angela Bassett felt that, you know, Trey needed to be with his father, who was played by Lawrence Fishburne as Furious. And so we see her dropping him off and, you know, saying her goodbyes, but knowing that it was the best decision for him at the time. But in hindsight, you see initially why he was frustrated. It worked out for the best for him later on. But as you can tell, because Trey has been over to Furious's house before, he has made friends. So him acclimating and going to his friend's house off the bat and, you know, just trying to tell them that, hey, I'm living here now. Like you could see that camaraderie already established. So now it's just about, hey, I'm going to be here a little bit longer this time so we can really kick it instead of me leaving on the weekends like before. As we see the development of these boys over the years, we also understand that Furious had a different set of rules than the rest of the parents. And that's just a light way to put it, right? I think in those kind of impoverished environments, you do see an array of different kind of parenting. And I think the misconception when it comes to people living those in kind of environments is that the parenting is lackluster. And that's not always the case. I know me personally, I have, you know, lived in and visited project neighborhoods. And we understood that maybe 2 doors down, that parent was strung out on drugs. But over here, this parent was very strict about the rules. This parent over here was very religious. And they prayed, you know, multiple times a day and had a different set of rules. While this parent over here was very, you know, active in the kids' sports. And while this parent over here, you know, may have left the kid alone for hours and hours. It just varied. And I think that the misconception of just because you live in poverty or in the projects that you are a bad parent, I think that that's totally false. And you could see that in this film. It's very apparent that Furious, while he may have been a womanizer in a way, or he had a way with women because he was a very attractive man, you could tell he didn't play when it comes to his respect, when it comes to, you know, being a forward thinker.
It's called gentrification. It's what happens when the property value of a certain area is brought down. They can buy the land at a lower price. Then they move all the people out, raise the property value, and sell it at a profit. Now what we need to do is we need to keep everything in our neighborhood, everything, black. Black owned with black money.
That was one thing we did witness was Furious being a forward thinker, you saw him standing on the corner, teaching, the youth as well as, the neighborhood about gentrification of the neighborhood, the systematic racism that was going on in the neighborhood. And he wasn't afraid to spread the word about it, because he understood that as the more people knew about the mishaps that were going on in the strategic levels of oppression that was happening, that it maybe, just maybe, that the community would get better. And so, people like that, men like that, leaders like that were very important during that time, because, I think in a lot of cases, people felt that they were giving up on, like, who cared what they did? They put these things in place, a gun store on every corner, a trap house over here, liquor store over here, that they set themselves up for failure. But no, they didn't set themselves up for failure. The powers that be did. And so it was up to them to still continue to make the right decision to better themselves, to better their community. And I think Furious just wanted that to be the case. So you saw his mind, you saw that he was trying to instill those things into Trey as well, but Trey still had a conflict. Trey had a conflict of doing the right thing, being a thinker, being a young gentleman, versus kind of going the other way, right? Like, because his friends, which I think had a large part to do with the company that he kept. His friends were definitely a product of their environment. They were of the hood. They, sold drugs. They had guns, all the things that, kind of like were a recipe for disaster. And so you saw them in places where anybody could look and see that danger was right around the corner. And we saw that. The ops definitely made their presence known. You just saw that trouble was getting ready to happen. So instantly we see how important fatherhood can be, even in these trying environments. While it may not be ideal to raise a son or a daughter in these kind of environments, just someone being there to navigate and to help correct their path is very, very important, and more likely to create and develop a kid that will be willing to do bigger and better things and move on to, a more positive life. And so the impact of the father cannot be minimized at all. A good father who is intentional, who is instructional, who is loving, who gives validation, who gives preparation, and who gives motivation for a kid to be their best version of themselves, that is priceless. The mother's love, the mother's nurturing, the mother's guidance, all of those things are equally as important. However, the father in the upbringing of a kid, regardless if they're poor or rich, is extra essential. And on the flip side, we could see the impact of an absent father, with Doughboy and the rest of his friends not really having that positive male role model in their lives. They led a different path. They were a little bit more careless. They were a little bit more ruthless. They were a little bit more, just kind of apathetic to their condition, to where a lot of times, even in my personal life, I've seen people who may have been dealt a negative hand feel like they can't do better. And when you have that feeling already in your brain that you can't do better, that this is it, and that I'm just going to do what I'm expected to do in this environment, then you lose hope. We had some little bit of hope in this story that the outcome of a boy trying to do the right thing would lead to success. And unfortunately, Trey saw that he had to do something. He had to get out of this environment because his best friend, which was played by Morris Chestnut and the brother of Doughboy, ended up getting killed. And that murder of his friend, just him witnessing that, was so traumatic for him. I can imagine the trauma associated with something like that happening, to where, again, that is leaving an impression on a person like Trey. And how does he respond to that? because you witnessing your friend try to run for his life and get gunned down from an individual who really had no real problem with his friend. I feel like that is something that can leave a mark on a person. You either become extremely jaded, you either become extremely, vengeful, to where you want to seek revenge for your friend's death, and then now you are in turn behind bars for that kind of a crime. So it's just like a revolving cycle. It's a revolving cycle of just trauma that happens when you're surrounded by murder and drugs and poverty and just hopelessness. But thankfully, Trey took that frustration and pointed it towards, hey, I got to get up out of here. There's no way that I could be successful. There's no way that I could go on to do the things that my father is even instilling in me to do if I live in this environment that's going to constantly try to bring me down. And having that mind to be able to pivot, and the success and the resources that you have in your life to allow you to pivot is so important. I think even in people who try to pivot, what happens is that the people around them will try to influence them not to, just because they don't feel that they can pivot. And that can be as detrimental as you just putting a gun in somebody's hand. You projecting that insecurity, that, hopelessness into somebody else because you don't feel like you can make a difference, that is just as bad as you helping them commit a crime. It's just ridiculous, because your inability to make a positive change should not dictate my life and my journey. And I think a lot of times it may not even be purposeful. It may not even be purposeful. That's the thing about it. It may not even be purposeful, but it happens because, trauma usually begets more trauma. And so, thankfully, Doughboy, while he may feel a little bit hopeless, while he may feel vengeful for his brother's life being taken from him, especially when he was on his way to going to play football and really, make a difference in his life, he didn't deter Trey.
Yo, cuz, I know why you got the call last night. Shouldn't have been there in the first place. You don't want that shit to come back to haunt you.
Y'all get him?
I don't even know how I feel about it neither, man. Shit just goes on and on, Next thing you know, somebody might try to smoke me.
He just felt like, hey, you do what you have to do for you, because you have an opportunity. But me, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to rectify the situation that happened to my brother, and we'll see what happens from there. Because it was so bad that I even heard growing up that just being young and black and reaching the age of 21 was a feat. That was success. And just having that even just being a saying, in our community, I feel like it's just defeating. And it's very, very unfortunate that a lot of boys just even think that way. And so, kudos to Trey's parents, but also kudos to Trey's girlfriend, played by Nia Long, who, wanted better for Trey, who wanted to see him just kind of go off. She had her own aspirations and dreams as well. And in this situation, Nia, I think, was going off to a different school, and Trey was going off to a different school. And she was just saying, hey, I'm willing to do this with you, but we both got to get up out of here. Like, me and you trying to stay together just for the sake of and being local and being around this area is just not, it's not a good idea. And so I'm glad she was able to have that foresight and feel that way, because it's important. It's important that, the decisions that you make when you're younger and how it's going to impact your life later on. So ultimately, I feel like Boyz N the Hood was such a successful story. Like I said, it was one of those stories that really kind of unpacked a lot of different layers as to what creates just an impoverished community, an impoverished mindset, crab in a barrel mentality, like all of the things that make up a hood. And, you know, how you're able to kind of like transcend that just based on some really good circumstances and some really good resources and some really good people that love you and want to see you win. So kudos to John Singleton. That is a classic. It will always be a classic. And I really do see it from a different lens as an adult, just, you know, being able to see the bigger picture of that story. So now that brings us to our throwback tune. This week's throwback tune is, of course, about a song that was thriving during the time of the movie that we're showcasing. And this week we are going to discuss the greatest voice of all time, Whitney Houston's All the Man That I Need. All of the Man That I Need, I would say, is top 5 Whitney Houston songs of all time. It is one of those songs that really showcased her range. You got to see her really be vulnerable with the type of guy that she was into, the type of love that she wanted. And my favorite part of the song was not even the video that came out, which was a great video, you know, classic 1991 video that showcased, you know, big hair and just kind of like a glossy look and, you know, her love for a guy. I get that. But my favorite, even just performance of this song, has to be if you Google All the Man That I Need, and Whitney Houston is singing this song in a red dress, and she is performing it for, you could tell, some military. I don't know if it's the Navy or the Air Force, whatever, but it is a military crowd, and she's performing for them, which a lot of them did back then. There was a lot of singers who, to help boost the morale of the military, they would have concerts for them. And they still do that now, I believe. But Whitney Houston was the biggest thing smoking around that time. Her second or third album was already out. And so she was really hot as fish grease. And she was performing this song in front of this crowd. And the way that they were just soaking in her voice, her talent, and the song itself. She had a saxophonist who was tearing it up. Like, he was just absolutely brilliant. And the way she was singing, it was so like, it almost sounded like a gospel song, which we know Whitney has a tendency to do because she, you know, grew up and developed in the gospel circuit. And of course, Cicely Tyson, she was in gospel music as well. So Whitney had those elements just in how she sang a song. And so when you're thinking about All the Man That I Need, you're also thinking about, when she's singing for this particular crowd, that she kind of might be talking about Jesus too. Like, it just sounded like it could be a gospel song, and the man that she's referring to is God. And so I really appreciate how it came across. She was sweating. She was just, you know, the makeup, of course, was different back then, but she still was beautiful. And she still just had just so much to give to this audience who, at that time, I think it was Desert Storm, actually, because my dad fought in Desert Storm. And so at that time, these people are really going through it in war. And so to have her sing for them, I just thought that was beautiful. And the song itself was absolutely beautiful. So, yeah, check that out. That is All That a Man That I Need by Whitney Houston. So that brings us to the end of the episode. I hope that you guys like, share, and subscribe. Do your thing and keep coming with the comments. Keep coming with the suggestions in the DMs. I greatly appreciate your support. And as always, you cannot manifest the life you feel like you don't deserve. So create the life that you want and look to the sky for grace. Bye-bye.